Okay, so I'm going to begin reading from this document. And I actually always love reading from the actual primary source itself. Um, this is unmediated. This is what they said. As I said in the other podcast, I have edited this, but you can take a look at the unedited version if you're interested. It's about twice as long as this version. Um, but what I focus on here are all the times that the Secession Convention talks about slavery, which is the dominant theme of this document, as it was the dominant theme of the other documents of the Southern slave states that left the Union. Okay, so let me start with the line Texas. It says she, but it means Texas. Texas was received into the Commonwealth, maintaining and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of the African to the white race within her limits, a relation that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, in which her people intended should exist in all future time. Her institutions and geographical position established the strongest ties between her and the other slaveholding states of the Confederacy. In this case, we're talking about the United States. So just to repeat that, the Texas came into the Union maintaining and protecting the institution known as Negro slavery, the servitude of African to the white race within her limits, a relationship that had existed from the first settlement of her wilderness by the white race, and which her people intended should exist in all future time. So for white Texans, slavery should exist forever. And this is where the majority of whites in Texas clashed with Lincoln. Lincoln wanted slavery to end over time. White Texans wanted to have it exist, the majority, for all time. Okay, so that's the first quote. The second quote is the anger that Texans feel over states that didn't like slavery, that were opposed to slavery. And they criticize these states that, based upon their unnatural feeling of hostility to these southern states and their beneficent, which means very positive, and patriarchal system of African slavery, proclaiming the debasing doctrine of the equality of all men. Let me repeat that the equality of all men, according to this document, is debasing. And when you debase something, you insult it. And so the idea that all men are equal is a debasing assumption, i.e., African Americans are not equal. So the debasing doctrine of the equality of all men, irrespective of race or color, a doctrine at war with nature, in opposition to the experience of mankind, and in violation of the plainest revelations of the demand of divine law. In other words, according to this document, the idea of inequality, that African Americans were not equal to white Americans, was a revelation of divine law. In other words, it came from God. And that anybody who talked about the equality of all men, the equality of races, was therefore going against God's will. They demand the abolition of Negro slavery throughout the Confederacy, without the United States, the recognition of political equality between the white and the Negro races, and avowed their determination to press on their crusade against us so long as Negro slaves remain in the United States. So here, the document is going beyond slavery, although the whole idea is that slavery has to continue in Texas. But it's making a statement about the equality of whites and blacks. And according to this document, God had made it so that African Americans and whites were not equal, and that anyone that claimed that they were going against God's word. So not only is this about the perpetuation of slavery. It's also about the perpetuation of the superiority, the supposed superiority of the white race over the African American race. Here's another line. They talk about the anger of the section of the United States that had voted for Lincoln, folks that opposed the continuation of slavery and wanted to put it on the road to ruin. And then this next line, which is very, very, it's fascinating in kind of a horrifying way. We hold as an undeniable truth that the government of the various states and of the Confederacy itself, were established exclusively by the white race for themselves and their posterity, which means 2020, by the way. That the African race had no agency in their establishment, that they, i.e., African Americans, were rightfully held and regarded as an inferior independent race. That they were rightfully held and regarded as an inferior independent race. And in that condition, only could their existence in this country be rendered beneficial or tolerable. So without slavery, it wasn't even tolerable, according to Texas whites, that African Americans be in Texas or be in the United States. That in this free government, all white men are and of right ought to be entitled to equal civil and political rights. That the servitude of the African race as existing in these states, i.e. slavery, is mutually beneficial to the bond and the free. So according to these folks, slavery is good for African Americans and is abundantly authorized and justified by the experience of mankind and the revealed will of the Almighty Creator, as recognized by all Christian nations. So in other words, that slavery is the revealed will of God himself or herself. While the destruction of the existing relations between the two races, i.e. slavery and non-slavery, as advocated by our sectional enemies, would bring inevitable calamities upon both and desolation upon the 15 slaveholding states. So there you have it. It could not be clearer that Texas left the Union and the other southern states left the Union in 1861 to protect slavery, that slavery is the revealed word of God, that is protected by God, that according to these people, slavery is good for both the white and the slave, and that it would bring destruction on the South. And of course it did, because emancipation, 700,000 Americans died to end slavery. So any notion that Texas left the Union in 1861 for any reason other than to protect slavery and to protect white supremacy in the form that it took by 1861, which was slavery, that any other reason for leaving the Union, or that, let me put it like this, that this was by far the most significant reason that Texas left the Union in 1861, to protect slavery and to protect white supremacy as it was practiced in Texas at that time via slavery. It is all about slavery. And anyone that thinks Texas left the Union for any reason other than slavery, frankly, is living in a dream world.